Welcome back, everyone, to our online class about flower fairies. This is a segment that's going to help you understand more about fairy gardening and creating a fairy garden. So, I'm coming to you from the Children's Fairy Garden area in Mill Creek Park in Fellows Riverside Gardens. And I just wanted to talk to you first about what is the difference between fairy gardening and creating a fairy garden. Now, as you know, it's a great deal of fun and a great novelty right now for most people to have a fairy garden. And all kinds of people who don't necessarily believe in fairies have one. And so what they'll do is they'll create a garden that has magnificent statues and fairy houses and things like that. But the most important thing the fairies want you to look at is whether or not that person is treating animals, plants, flowers, trees with respect. And if they're not, this is kind of a mockery, and it's something that, the fairies are not too happy about. They certainly don't give their blessing to those gardens the way they do to someone who truly is trying and loves nature and respects animals, plants, flowers, trees, and they may be open to fairies. They may not necessarily believe in them, but they're open to them. And that's the kind of person that then does garner the fairy respect and blessings and energy that comes along from their special kingdom. And believe me, you want fairies blessing your garden, because you remember these are fairies that are from the earth kingdom, and they have the ability to tint each flower and make each flower individual and unique, just like each human being is unique. So you want a fairy blessing your garden. Now, when it comes to creating a fairy garden, the best way to begin is to make sure your garden is pure. What do I mean by that? That means that you take time to pick up any garbage that might be nearby, and just make sure it's clean of things that are not natural and should not be there. Now, I want to walk around a bit and just show you different parts of this garden so you can get an idea of what I'm talking about. When creating your fairy garden, you want to make sure that everything is very pure, so there can be no chemicals on it. And that means using everything organic in the soil. So people always ask, how in the world do I do that and keep the pests away? You have to understand that insects are very precious to the fairies. All insects and grubs are their children, and so no chemicals would be allowed. In fact, only 2% of insects are non-beneficial to people and would harm people. So always keep that in mind. But when you're creating your fairy garden, then you want to use something to keep the soil very healthy, and that, of course, would be an organic compost. So what you would do is take your green and brown vegetable peelings, your fruit waste, things like tea bags, eggs, coffee grounds, and place them in a composting area and let them break down. Actually, let the fairies, the gnomes, break them down. And as they do that, they're adding their special energy and light and magic to that compost. And then when it's time to create your garden a couple weeks ahead of time, you take and you mix that compost into the soil to create a richness to it. You can also create a compost tea. That would be adding water to the compost. And all of that has the vital nutrients that you're then drawn in through the flower's roots, and really bless it and just nourish it and make it marvelous. Now, there are many other things that you can bring into a fairy garden. I'm hoping you can see this little garden that I'm at right now. You can use coffee grinds into the soil as a mulch kind of idea, especially if you have acid-loving plants. You can use cinnamon when you are planting seeds to keep the seeds from dampening too much. You can use your crushed eggshells. The birds are agreeing with me right now. I'm sure you can hear them. Crushed eggshells in the soil, just to really make it, very, very special and keep it airy and fresh and pure. And then they want me to mention bringing beneficial insects into your garden. So, of course, the most beneficial insect to any fairy garden would be the ladybug. And anything you can do to attract them. There are all kinds of wonderful plants and flowers that you can plant to attract them, are just perfect and magnificent. And we'll talk about those in a little bit. There are other kinds of flowers that you can plant, such as marigolds. I'm not seeing any around here right now, but we might be able to find another garden in another part of this park where I can show them to you. They are actually a defense against negative insects that will come into your garden. So if you plant them around the garden, like a fence, that will keep pests out. And these are all great fairy techniques that they want me to mention to you. Now I'm going to seek out another part of the park for the rest of our discussion on fairy gardens. When you're creating your fairy garden, it's really good to look at your whole area of your yard, your backyard, with an open heart and with your, third eye, to see which area truly would be most inviting for fairies. And literally what you can do is walk out into your yard. You can put out the call and say to the fairies, where would be the best place for me to create a fairy garden? This truly is using a magical fairy gardening technique. And watch for either physical manifestations of fairies or sparkles of light, orbs. I find most often people will see the sparkles here and there, and that will be almost like a fairy trail for you to follow. And this is where you will create your fairy garden. Now you need to make sure this is a place where you can let it go. You will not be mowing in this area ever. Remember, you will not be using pesticides in this area. And basically what you can do, I know we have the fairy homes behind me right now that I want to show you. These are all wonderful ways to create a magical fairy garden. We have a beautiful mirror that says, do you believe? These are all wonderful mechanisms, but you can also just very simply take rocks that you are guided to and create a fairy ring. Place the sparkling rocks down onto the earth. And if you are guided to, you can create crystals. They're saying it's almost like a crystal grid. If you've ever made one, I'm a Reiki person, so we work with crystal grids a lot in Reiki. But if you put crystals all in a circle, you can actually work with the fairies to utilize your energy and the fairies' energy to charge that area with light. So what they're showing me is you placing your hand on each crystal in the circle and then creating an affirmation with it. I bless this fairy circle with love, healing, and light. That kind of idea. And the fairy is working with you at that point to actually draw that beautiful energy into each crystal and create whatever you want to manifest with this circle. With the light of my heart, I draw fairies to the circle so they may rest and create their beautiful area of recreation. That kind of idea to it. Then you can also, on the trees in that area, hang beautiful crystals or scarves. I don't know how many of you have ever been to Glastonbury, England, but immediately the area that comes to mind for me are the Chalice Well Gardens, where when you go there to the Chalice Well, you just see hanging from the yew trees around it beautiful ribbons and scarves. And of course, they're saying anything that is sparkly and glittery. So if you want to hang jewels, those kinds of ideas, they would be very welcome in your fairy garden. Now I'm going to switch to another part of the park, and I'll be back in a moment. So we've moved to another part in the park right now. We have some beautiful plantings with their fairy gardens behind us. And if you want to, going back to that thought about attracting those beneficial insects like the ladybugs to your garden, planting feverfew or coreopsis are really, really good ideas. It's also wonderful to bring a pond into your fairy garden, if that is possible, because you're bringing the element of water. And then if you let it fill with natural water, you're bringing in the water fairies, the undine, into your garden, which is precisely what you want. They work differently than the flower fairies are all about creating joy in your life. The water fairies are about helping you work with your emotions. So it's really good to have them in your garden as well. Now, really, really important also when you're creating this garden to just make sure that the fairies understand that this is where you want them to come. And you can always be playing beautiful music in the garden. For me, I love Mendelssohn's Midsummer Night's Dream. I'm an actress. I've been blessed to do that show multiple times. I've played Titania the Fairy Queen, so I'm very, very partial to that. But it's an idea. And you just want to make sure that you are in good communication with the fairies. So they can tell you then precisely where to do the plantings. If you've created the circle, you want the plantings to be near it, but not in it. So for example, you can see behind me there are, all kinds of beautiful tulips, and then a beautiful tree behind us that is flowering right now, and it's absolutely gorgeous. And what they want us to do is ask them what flowers they would like in their garden. So you would naturally be planting whatever your fairies guide you to plant, plus things that would draw the butterflies, which are aligned to the fairy kingdom. And so you would be planting the bees balm and things like the butterfly bushes, and then whatever else your fairies guide you. They're also wanting me to talk about the other insects that would be coming to your garden once you invite them, like the dragonflies, which are so much a part of keeping those unbeneficial insects away, such as the mosquitoes. You can also, and people might be loath to do this, but it's a good idea, invite dragonflies in, or not dragonflies, but bats in as well. And bats eat literally thousands of mosquitoes in a night. So these are giving you all some ideas about fairy gardening. And there is just so much you can do within your fairy garden. to really bless fairies and the fairy kingdom. And always make sure you keep an eye out at night because you might see the fairies playing there. So thank you so much, and I'll be back with the next segment very soon. Fairy blessings, one and all.